Okay, welcome everybody to the first in a series of videos on how to approach the non-examined assessment for OCR. In today's video, we're going to be covering how you write an effective history introduction. In the subsequent videos, we will be covering the different assessment objectives for OCR and how you can meet those in your essay. And then a final video in the series will focus on how to write the perfect conclusion. So I want to start off by talking about what the purposes of a history introduction. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that the introduction required in your NEA requires different skills. So the new skills that you have to focus on are your ability to survey the existing opinions of historians. You should really be using the introduction to outline the historical debate in relation to a question. Now, you'll see in the subsequent videos that for AO3, one of the key criteria for a top mark in AO3 is that awareness of historical debate. So please use your introductions to show kind of what people are thinking. So you should be saying, there is one school of thought as exemplified by this historian who is arguing this about this. In contrast to them, there are some historians from this school of thought who believe this. There's also another school of thought such as this, and so on. Okay. You then, after you've surveyed the existing opinions, you should then briefly outline the argument and position that your essay is going to take. Okay. So you should say, well, after I've considered this historian, this historian, this historian, this essay is going to be arguing this. Okay. And your argument should be you shouldn't really be fully agreeing with anyone. You should be giving your own nuanced opinion, and then you should justify it very briefly. Okay. When outlining the argument or position of the essay, try and position yourself against some historians as well. So say why you disagree with some historians and why, okay? So that's also something that you should be doing. And then the structure of your essay should be briefly fleshed out, okay? So you should be saying, in this essay, I'm going to prove my argument by looking at 4 different aspects, okay? So if it's a question about, I don't know, if you had a question on the cause of the Russian Revolution, you might decide to focus on one section might be on the Tsar's weaknesses, right? Another section might be on the importance of war and so on, okay? You should be introducing very briefly the different sections and how they ultimately prove your argument. So in terms of the assessment objectives, how can you hit those in the introduction? So the 2 AOs that you should be meeting in the introduction are AO1, which is basically, I've put clarity of argument there. It's a lot more than that, but essentially for the introduction, you should be giving a clear, consistent and strong argument. And AO3, you should be engaging with the debate and the work of historians, and you should be evaluating them and saying how far you agree, okay? So that's basically the 2 assessment objectives that I think can be hit in the intro. Now, you can satisfy AO1 by just outlining your argument and stating why you have come to that conclusion, okay? Now, please give a reason, give a rationale as to why you are giving that opinion. So if we carry on with the cause of the Russian Revolution example, you should be saying, well, this essay is going to take strongly the view that it was actually World War I that caused the Russian Revolution, because in 1913, the Tsar, on the eve of war, was actually the closest he had been to his people for 20 years. And the only turning point between 1913 and 1917 was the failure of Russia in World War I. Okay, so that would be a clear rationale. And you then would need to outline how you're going to prove that and what your different sections are going to be. To reach the highest AO marks, try and make your argument sophisticated, okay? Now, don't do this for the sake of doing it, okay? Only if you feel comfortable doing this. So the example I gave is relatively sophisticated because I was giving examples of how on the eve of revolution, the Tsar was in a strong position and so on, okay? So I gave a pretty backed up, I had a very clear rationale and the argument as well backed up. If you're trying to really push yourself, you might want to go a bit more sophisticated. So you might want to think about, well, how can we measure the causes of a revolution? Surely the most important cause will be something that affects all of the people, that has the biggest economic impact on the people, that creates or that demonstrates an inability or lack of capacity in the current ruler to rule. Okay, that would be how you might do a criteria-based approach. Now, I put there, don't do this for the sake of doing it, all right? You can still get the highest bracket of AO1 marks without that level of sophistication. If you're trying to target that full marks, that really high A star, then it does give your essay a bit of a bump if you have a bit more of a sophisticated argument, okay? So that's just how you can approach that. And obviously throughout the year, we've been talking about how you can interweave sophistication into your essays. So don't stray too far away with what we've been talking about in class. I would just kind of consolidate what we've been doing if you want to do that. And then finally, you can satisfy AO3 in the introduction by introducing relevant historical debate and stating which historians you disagree and agree with. And always briefly state why. Even in the intro, just very briefly think about, well, what have they considered? What have they failed to consider if you disagree with them? And is their argument simplistic? Is it complex? Does it take into account all the nuances? And so on. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 introductions now. This introduction, I had the permission of a student in a former year to use her work. So very kindly, she's allowed me to include this. So have a little read through, pause the video now, and then we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses, and then we're going to have a look at some of the full mark responses, one of which was from TG, and then the other one is the one that the exam board releases, okay? So I'll have a little read through this one. Pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video and you had a little read through that. This answer, I won't go into the exact grade that it got. It was a very strong answer throughout. It didn't get full marks. Off the top of my head, it wasn't in the top bracket, but it is nonetheless a good answer. Okay, so you'll see this over the course of the next few videos. You'll see a few excerpts from it. But these are the strengths. Okay, so first of all, they clearly introduce a sense of debate when they talk about having heavily debated. So we know that we're going to get some historian debate. They then introduce some historians. We've got Luke Rimo-Lego and Dominic Godinot, and those have both been referenced, which is, again, great. And then they've given the opinion of both historians. Now, look at the question, assess the consequences of the French Revolution for women in France. They've then given their opinions, theorizing that women undertook a weighty role in the revolution where they were able to advocate for their own rights and take up positions of political power. So that's quite clear, clearly linked to the question. So the question asking about the effects of the French Revolution on women in France, and they're clearly saying that women played a big role and it led to them taking on more political positions. Okay, so that's clearly linked. And then they say, although they claim that women undertook positions of power during the revolution era, so they're introducing, that's a really good sentence starter to basically kind of disagree with a certain claim. So they're positioning themselves in relation to current historians, okay, which is great. So that's them ticking the AO3, introducing that evaluative component. Then later on, we've got even more of that. So we've got where it says, this challenges the contemporary feminist claim that great progress for women and feminist movement was made due to the opportunities that this period produced. So again, we've got an explanation and a positioning in relation to current historiography. And then finally, they've then introduced their sections that they're focusing on. So it says, for instance, political clubs, the emergence of revolutionary political key figures, the role of women, and Napoleon's oppressive rule. And then finally, towards the end, they give their argument, which they've already hinted at, but it's really clearly outlined, okay? So it says the fact that it was never sustained or always hindered in some way depicts the limited extent in which women were impacted by the French Revolution. Ultimately, it was not that beneficial for the women of France, and the period is characterized as one of mainly stagnancy and regression. So their opinion is clearly outlined. Now, here's the areas for improvement. So like I said, this answer didn't make it to the top bracket. It is a very good answer. They didn't make it to the top bracket, and these are some of the reasons why. So first of all, it says influential revolutionary thinkers of the era, such as Rousseau and writer Diderot. The reason why I've highlighted that is that that's technically AO2 because they're focused on people at the time, whereas we want to be hitting AO3. So they wouldn't classify, well, sorry, they wouldn't class as historians. So that firstly kind of undermines a bit of the AO3 in this answer. And then secondly, I should have highlighted this part as well. So this part here, where they talk about they held the traditionalistic belief that women were biologically inferior and should remain where they perform best, the domestic sphere. What the students doing here is they're outlining what Rousseau and Diderot believe, but it's not actually relevant to the question, or it's not being made explicitly linked back to the question. Because the question is saying, what were the consequences of the French Revolution for women in France? And this is more what did men at the time believe about women, okay? So if this student had then said, well, because Diderot and Rousseau were so influential that their views were then transmitted to so many people, therefore meaning that the French Revolution spread negative ideas about women in France, then that would be valid, okay? So it's really crucial that you link back very closely and constantly to your question. If there's any parts which are vague, then you're going to be shedding marks on that part. We then have a bit odd phrasing here. It says contemporary feminist claim. What they're trying to say is feminist historians now. By contemporary, though, that would imply that they're feminist historians at the time, which is not what the student is wanting to say. So there's a little bit of a lack of clarity there. We then have the word before, but the question is the consequences of the French Revolution for women in France. So by focusing on women before the revolution, that's actually not relevant, because the question is asking about the effects of the revolution, not what it was like before the revolution. And then finally, to talk about the Napoleonic Code in 1804, some historians would argue that the French Revolution had moved into a different stage there. So it would have been nice if the student had outlined what is meant by the word French Revolution. And that's something that you guys should be looking to do in your answers, unpicking some of the key terms in the question and making sure that it's really clear what you're talking about. And then the big thing is that there's only 2 historians given. We want to be seeing quite a few more. So the ideal is probably, about 5 or 6 historians in the intro for sure. Okay, have a little read through the following. I will say that they are full mark answers, but that's not, there is a pretty standout weakness in the next one. So pause the video and see if you can identify what the said weakness is. Okay, hopefully you've paused the video now. And this answer is strong in terms of an awareness of the debate. So this first paragraph, the student is really clearly outlining the debate, and they've named the schools of thought. So Stalinist picture, Western paradigm, Marxist-Leninist thought. That's a very, very clear understanding of the debate and the context in which we're talking about. And then in the second paragraph, they clearly outline their argument in a very sophisticated manner. So talking about how unique and unprecedented phenomena necessitate insightful and complex interpretations. That's very high level wording at this stage. And then they consider, or then they then outline towards the end, the 4 sections that they're going to be focused on. So Stalin's rural repression, the 5-year plans, the purges, and the cult personality. The standout weakness, and let's see if you've got this, the standout weakness is there's no mention of historians. Now, this student throughout the essay mentioned many historians, and that's why they were able to get full marks. But that is the standout weakness. Apart from that, it's a pretty solid introduction. So I would use this as an example of where there isn't really that much to be doing, okay, for this student. If they just include some historians in the first paragraph, then you're looking at probably a very solid introduction, I would say. This is the one released by the exam board, sorry. So again, have a little pause. I won't talk too much about this just because it can be a little bit confusing because the student doesn't follow a clear structure. But yeah, pause the video and then we'll talk through it. Okay, so hopefully you pause through it, and this is basically what the exam board has said about this. So first of all, it's clear that they've got a variety of interpretations. So they do mention some historians, although they could have mentioned more. They do introduce some kind of context behind the interpretations, and then they evaluate the interpretation. And then towards the end, they then, where it says, as a result, although the timing may be the direct result of religious change, the underlying causes are much more rooted in the social and economic issues that pervaded not only Devon and Cornwall, but also East Anglia. So they're giving their argument clearly towards the end of the intro. The issue with this paragraph, I would say, is it's quite short for an introduction. I would have liked to have seen personally a little bit more of the debate outlined and then a more detailed fleshing out of their argument. I felt like their argument was quite rushed. So they talk a lot about, if I just get my annotation pen, so they talk a lot about here why they disagree with other interpretations that are already existing, but then they only actually have that many lines devoted to their actual argument. Now, again, because the rest of the answer was really, really good and they fleshed out their argument throughout, they were able to get the full marks. But I would probably be using this in conjunction with the other 2 introductions to give you an indication of what a perfect one would look like. Essentially, the one that you probably want to be using to help you the most is the one on the previous slide, which is this one here, and just imagine that this student had mentioned historians, okay? So just to recap, this is what you should be doing. in your introduction. So ask yourself these questions at the end when you've written your intro. So have you given relevant historians and their relevant opinions? Aim for at least 4. I know I said 5 or 6, but aim for at least 4 with at least 2 different positions or 2 different schools of thought. Have you stated which historians are more convincing and why? Have you stated your own opinion? Have you given a justification to support your opinion? And have you stated what the different sections of your answer will explore and how that links to your overall opinion? If you can answer all of those questions with a firm yes, then your intro is on track to being very, very good indeed. Right, thank you very much for watching. The other NEA videos will be released shortly, and I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you all in the next video.